This is Raja from Perez, which means to think, a show about authors, creators, and influencers who share narratives about their culture and identity. Welcome to the show.
I'll never forget the first time I took an in-school survey. It was about drug use in adolescence, but those questions didn't bother me. The survey before it did. Age, 13. Sex, male. Race, check 1. My heart drops. I raise my hand and whisper, I don't really want to check just 1. Teacher reminds me to follow directions, check 1. So I guess I should pick who I am today. So today I'm Mexican. I wear my hair only 2 inches, gelled down, slicked back so hard, bullets would ricochet right off of me. I want to make sure that they get that I'm at least Chicano. No puedo hablar español muy bien, pero my last name is Perez, and I hope that counts for something. But today I'm black. I took the gel out my hair because my stepdad called me nigger. I should braid it now, fit my role, right? I never forget the first time somebody told me, yeah, you my nigga, but you not really black. It made my heart turn angry because I gave up my Mexican side today, hoping that my black friends would pick me up. So again, I am Mexican. The teacher walks up to me and speaks Spanish. Embarrassed, I say I can't really speak it, but on the inside, I wonder if I should cherish this as a win because I was finally accepted as who I feel I am. But today, I am nothing because somebody asked me, what are you? As if my race preceded being human. Ran their fingers through my hair to show me that my body is not my own. I lose everything and nothing each time this happens. So when someone tells me to check 1, I refuse to answer. And this test is a refusal. This refusal is a testament to my histories. You gotta think back then, see, shackles been taken off, but niggas still think back then. We are dreadlocked. Let me repeat that. I said locked in dread. We can't get thin back cause our skin's black, and I can't get thin back cause my skin ain't. I can't take back the moment my abuelita silenced her native tongue and painted my mom American, the same color my face gets when I'm spoken to in a language that was stolen from me. This color is embarrassment. I cannot find my histories in their textbooks. Every single one of my land's taken. I want my then back, but they keep telling me that history is written by the victors. But don't you know that my name comes from conqueror? My blood is from the Yaqui tribe. I want my then back, so that check 1 box is to make my hands tremble, to make me forget the voice box that my then gives me now. So now I rap and I rhyme because I want time back. Better yet, I want mine back. Matter of fact, 2 times that, because even the time that we had now is their time halved. This is to the haves and to the have-nots. From the barrios to the cell blocks, I'm still learning how to pronounce my own name. I am learning my histories. I'm learning to take the weight of colonization off of my tongue. I'm sharpening it to check those trying to check 1 me, checkmate. I am future without your histories. Thank you. Thank you.
Snapping all around. That was amazing. I could just hear, literally, there was so much soul in that. That was beautiful.
Well, on that note, guys, I'm sitting here with Vincente Perez, the man, the father, the husband, poet, musician, and spoken word artist. I mean, there are so many titles that you hold. There's so much that you do. So I would first like to thank you for being here. It is truly a pleasure to meet you in person. And, I like to start off the interview by asking what the premise is of your writing.
I think I'm really focused on the power of narrative. I mean, all the time we talk about stories and we talk about advice, and there's like lots of money and people telling other people how to live their lives and how to think about their lives. I didn't want to do something like that, but I thought, what is important about my experience? And I felt like my experience was that I had a story that I felt other people could relate to, and more importantly, it wasn't being shared elsewhere. And so my work is really about telling stories that I felt a lot of people haven't told before, and if people have told them, they've not been respected or seen as tools of survival. And so far from just being casual stories that people tell one another, I think narrative is actually one of the most powerful things in the world. It's kind of cliche, but everything that happens in the world, from belief systems to politics, comes from the stories that you believe, whether it's about yourself or other people. And I think it's crucial that we start thinking about those stories that we learn. And so my work is all about telling a story and telling it plain as day, but also being very real about my experiences and using my personal experiences.
Right, of course. It always takes that first person to start talking about, their own experiences in order to really, just show a sense of awareness. And what is your narrative? What is your story? What are you trying to tell the world?
Yeah, my story is mostly about being a young Black and Latino boy, and thinking about my in-betweenness.
Right.
And so when folks see me, some folks know I'm what they call mixed. Some folks know I'm Black and something else. Some people believe I'm just Mexican. Some people don't know. And so with all that, there has to be something within it. And I personally found that when I focus my story on the in-betweenness and the ways that people aren't able to categorize me, and the way that that's let me slip into different communities and see how people talk about one another and their stories, right, that's just a crucial experience that not a lot of people have. A lot of people, whether it's people of color, have their experiences. People who are white have their experiences and their stories. And it's kind of this other experience when you're not automatically coded as one thing and you're able to move through the world. I mean, I've had people, not accept me for who I was, and that's like its own issue. Then I've had people who have an easier time accepting me in my politics because I'm light skinned. And so there's just so much there that I felt like.
And is it all because of ethnicity? Is it?
Yeah, it's the way people have learned to think about race and ethnicity. When it comes to ethnicity, my Mexican family, it's like no one ever really wanted me to be Black, right, and because that meant a very specific thing to them. And that's, that horizontal racism that goes on where people of color learn about other people of color. And so it's like that was going on in my Mexican family. And then as I, moved into, thinking more about my Blackness and being part of a diaspora and knowing that race isn't just skin tone, I've had a lot of Black folks accept me because of my politics, and then other Black folks be very, very hesitant about accepting someone who's light, who's a man, and who wants to talk about these kinds of things. Just making it very clear that
just because you don't fit the picture.
Yeah, the picture, people don't automatically code me. And so there's so many different layers that my narrative is about looking at those layers, looking at the ways I fit in and I don't fit in, and trying to use those experiences to tell a story.
So how did you find your identity within the different, without being fully accepted?
Yeah, so I think actually narrative, it comes back to that. Poetry
Right.
was one of the first ways I really learned to accept parts of my Blackness. I mean, when you're a young kid who is coded as Mexican for most of the time, but then you grow your hair out and you have your curls and you can't style it the way everybody else is styling it, you start to feel a little weird. You start to feel different. And so I started to use poetry to talk about the things I was going through. As a kid, I was a very angry, radical person, and so poetry was the way that I got that out in what I felt was a safe environment. And so that's how I explored.
Is that where SubVersive comes from?
Yeah. So that's where really I explored my Blackness, was by being very political and thinking, looking at Malcolm X's writings, looking at the birth of hip hop as a very, very, hybrid music type. I mean,
Right.
it's so many different cultures came together in order to produce hip hop. And, it's a huge part of Black culture, and it's a huge kind of testament to how diasporic Black people are. And so as I got into hip hop, I started rapping and doing poetry. Someone jokingly kind of gave me this name of SubVersive because I was always political. I was never kind of casually rapping about what typical pop or hip hop rappers rap about. I mean, people were saying like, you're always preaching, so they called me Preach for a little bit, and that was like its own joke. And then just SubVersive came out of just knowing that I was never ever going to personally, and other people can do it, and that's beautiful. Hip hop's like this huge genre, but I was never going to personally ever not be very political with my writings. And so, I just got involved with Blackness. I started thinking more about social justice and just trying to use my voice, because people always said, you have a great voice, you should use it. Try to use it for good in that way.
What experience, what was your first experience with dealing with the, identity crisis? When did you actually realize, like, oh, am I Black or am I Latino?
Yeah. Well, so It's been kind of like throughout my life. I always like knew my biological father is black, but he wasn't around. So I always knew that I was black, but it was something I never really had to think a bunch about.
Right.
And so really when I started getting to middle school, when my hair started to grow out longer, and when I started to say, you know, like I am black and I want to identify as black, that's when the, are you sure? I'm not seeing it. You know, here's how you might be and here's how you might not be. Those conversations really started in middle school. And so I actually captured that entire experience, even though it was, you know, over months and months of times, and there were a bunch of microaggressions and a bunch of times in my life where these crises were happening. I kind of put it down into one story of remembering that I needed to take the survey before I did this other survey, and it was a demographic aspect. And the first thing that they said was check one. It was, at that time, it wasn't a mark all that apply or check the ones that apply. I sat there and looked at Mexican / Latino, black, Native American, white, other. And it was just a shocking experience that I sat there and was like, most people are going to mark something and keep it moving, but I couldn't. It felt wrong. And so I raised my hand and tried to ask the teacher, you know, like, is there any way that I can do something different? And, you know, they're telling me, like, you need to just mark one. If you don't feel like one captures you, then go ahead and mark other. And so it's just like to be marked other in that space. And I didn't know what it meant at that time. I just knew that it just didn't feel good. And so that experience was really what started the, wow, like this is going to be something I'm going to have to navigate for the rest of my life.
Yeah, according to this piece of paper, you don't even have a set title. Yeah. And it doesn't even matter. You're just other. And
it's wild because that, you know, back to this idea of narrative, the power of narrative. I mean, that power of you're one or the other, that narrative it has been dispelled so many times, but it's still so powerful in our society. The 2000 census was the first time that you were ever able to mark that you were multiracial. Wow. And so it's just like knowing that, it's just amazing to think about, you know, how are people forced into these boxes all the time? And how does that, you know, keep them from certain connections, from certain cultural upbringings, from whole aspects of life, just by being forced into a box and thinking you have to stay there.
Right, and that's what's so beautiful about having you here right now, is that you're able to talk about it. You're able to step out of that box. You know, they didn't have the opportunity and means to do so because that was just the norm. Yeah. How old were you when you started to realize these things? Because you're 23 now. I mean, you're still very young, and you've already accomplished so much, and just being self-aware and telling your story and being so confident in doing so. You know, when this, when you were checking this box off, like how old were you at that time?
Yeah, that was middle school. So
wow,
somewhere between 11 and 14. Yeah, somewhere in there. I think it was probably when I was about 12. I don't know the exact age, but I know maybe someone else can like backtrack and figure out when you're given that survey. But it was the MOXA survey.
During this time, like at that age, when you started taking the negative thoughts or energy and started putting it down into writing?
Yeah. I mean, I started poetry right about 13, so it was in that area. I was probably just, as I was mentioning earlier, probably just angry and political for a long time, and then I started to use poetry as a way to get out everything.
But that is crazy impressive. How do you do that at such a young age? You know, most people at that age would just act out, you know, just find some way to let the anger out, and you took it and you put it to good use. You know, you took a negative situation and you tried to, you know, turn it into a positive outcome. Yeah. And not only that, you also turned it into, you know, a teaching opportunity at such a young age, because eventually you were going to have the world listen to your words.
That was my hope. All I knew was that I was able to be told by many people around me, like, you need to do something with your voice. And it's great that I had that support network, but it also meant that so many people who were like me didn't have that support network, and that was what was really powerful for me. I felt a big responsibility to, you know, not to show my peers that there was another way, even though I was going through so much. And really, I had to write. I had to write to save my own life. I didn't see myself represented in any other writings. I didn't see my experiences represented anywhere, and I didn't see people take the politics that I had seriously. And so, you know, it was all about, you know, smart kids are listened to, or smart kids get supported. And so I used that in order to take that platform that I was given because of that, you know, title, and do something with it. Because I was watching my friends have the same thoughts that I was having, but they didn't have the same, they didn't want to do poetry, you know, they didn't want to be political, but they had the same exact thoughts from similar experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was always like, you know, you just need to use your writing as a way to make it out, you know. And so you use writing as a very, very real tool, a very real self-care tool.
And when you realized that this was, you know, your mission, this is what you wanted to do, how did you improve your writing? How did you start, really?
Yeah, so I started basically when I was 13. I just started writing poetry, and so that meant that I had like a crazy home life at that time. Like right when all this stuff was happening was actually when my family was going through a bunch of bouts of homelessness. There was domestic abuse in my family, and so like I said, it's not a joke at all. I started writing to live. I needed to write out my feelings.
Wow.
My first writings, I still remember them. They were just anger and trying to find a way to put some words to my feelings, and that's something that not everyone had. And so I just did that, and then I started realizing that I was rapping every time that I did that. And so I actually started in the spoken word and hip hop area by rapping first, and then it turned into spoken word poetry. I actually didn't start spoken word poetry until I got to college, and so I'd always been writing. But before I got to college, at about 18, 16 to 18, I dropped 2 mixtapes, and so I was in my room with my, my MacBook Air, with my school laptop, just writing and just being as prolific as I could be. And I was messing up, and I was finding what worked and what didn't work. I would try to fit on certain hats, and so really, I was supported by my friends, and so like my support network just encouraged me to keep doing poetry. You know, you're not always going to be perfect. Keep doing art. Never let anybody take your expression away from you. Be as angry as you need to be, but put it into this writing. And so I just kept going with it. And so it's literally just practice. And I was really just felt like I was born and made for this type of thing. Whenever I talk, people tell me that I get into this rhythm when I just talk, and that whenever I just do anything, I'm just like, it's like you're preaching, but I still want to listen to you. And so it's like, I try to stay as humble as I can be, but also knowing that not everyone has that ability. And so if communication is my number one tool, use it. And so
I think what it is with you, I think what people are drawn to is the fact that you're not, right now from what I see, is that you're not talking at me. You're speaking to me, and it seems like you're very passionate about it. It seems like it's something that comes from the heart, it comes from experience, it comes from what you know. So that's what keeps me, listening and very intrigued. I can tell that it's something that's very special to you. So what should readers or listeners expect from you? What makes your writing different?
I think people are just kind of thrown back by how genuine and straightforward I am. A lot of people, and it's not a negative thing, it's just there's a trend in whenever you think about history, everything has to be this elaborate, flowery language, and it just doesn't touch as many people as you want it to. And so I don't do poetry like I went and got a bachelor's in creative writing. I don't write poetry like I have a master's in fine art. I write poetry because it's literally how I think about the world. And so from hip hop to Black culture to Latino culture, just thinking about using the type of things that I know and just being as real and open, as honest as I can be. And so I think people are just thrown back by how just straightforward I am. And that's powerful when people think of poetry to be this kind of like intricate thing. And it's not to say that you can't be very simple and straightforward and also be intricate, but I think it's just a testament to what people learn about poetry. So I take what people think they know about poetry and I turn it against them. Because like when you look at me, you don't necessarily see a poet, you don't necessarily see a father. You might not have known that I was Black and Latino. Right. So I know these things that my audience knows about me, and I turn it against them. When it's poetry and I'm in this space where people are talking about these crazy topics, but I'm cursing and I'm telling it straight like it is, like how you hear people talk about it on the streets. That's way different than when people are able to kind of like build it up and turn it into this intelligent, over-intelligent thing. Like I kind of just see it, and for me, my biggest power is just being simple, straightforward, but making a connection or showing some type of representation of something that people don't think of before. Right. And so it's like taking high art, taking, my elitist ass education and using all I learned there, but putting it in poetry so that it's digestible, so that it's understandable, so that's relatable. And that's the focus of my work, is just being relatable, telling a story that I feel the audience is going to get, and telling a story that the audience needs to hear, regardless of if they want to hear it. I'm not actually too worried about whether or not they want to hear the things that I have to say. I think that a lot of my work touches on things we don't want to talk about, and that's where the power comes from. It's because these narratives are working all the time, but we don't always know that they're there.
It's almost like a culture shock.
Yeah.
Definitely would be. They're kind of diving into, or just, stepping in, getting a glimpse of what goes on in your world, which could be very different to what they're used to. So it's something very new, so it's always going to be shocking, whether they want to hear it or not. And how do you keep it going now? How do you keep the creative juices flowing? What's advice that you could actually share with different people with the same passion?
Yeah, I think there's a time when you know when to step back from things, when to work really hard on things, and when to kind of keep things on the back burner. I think that's really important for constant writing, because if you want to do well, you actually do have to constantly be writing. And so if you can find 10 minutes at the end of the day to write something, I feel that's a lot better than not writing anything at all. You're not always writing to use what you're writing and to turn it into a performance piece or a spoken word poem, but if you can keep the way you think about the world working in a poetic way, that's helpful. If you can find a way to, no matter what you're doing, think about narratives, it's crucial. If you can think about pulling and teasing out something beautiful and amazing and intricate from the mundane and everyday, I think that's where inspiration has to come from. You're not always going to be inspired, and if you want to have, some type of momentum, if you want to carry yourself forward, you have to be able to constantly be working, even if not everything is a final or finished project. You just have to sometimes put stuff out there. You have to just keep working. You have to, take some time to really reflect on why you're writing, and do different things. For me, since I use so much of my personal experiences, I always have to just check in with myself. What's going on that I'm not writing, and that may be the topic that ends up being the next write, anyways. So why am I not writing? If I am writing, is what I'm writing worth it? Is it important that I get these things out, or am I just writing to write? And knowing all of that as I'm writing helps keep me on track.
So would you say it's your more powerful voice, just because it's a message?
It's a deeper message. It's where I have personally found the most acceptances in the Black community.
Right.
It's just thinking about just being real and straightforward, and using kind of storytelling to do something important. One of the biggest barriers, and I write about it a lot, is the language barrier that I have. I don't speak Spanish, and so for a lot of my life, that was the crisis for me, was figuring out how to be Mexican but not speak Spanish. And there are a lot of people who still welcome me in, but I think it's important for people to have their spaces, and if I can't get into a space because I can't speak Spanish, I'm not going to interrupt that space. I'm just going to think about, how what does that teach me about identity? What does that teach me about how much work we have people of color have to do to promote solidarity between each other, so that we can see, that not everybody's, trying to infiltrate for a bad reason, So it's just kind of playing on the tightrope of knowing to transgress with my art, and to use some of the experiences in some ways, and to keep certain conversations and topics out of the public. And so I just have found that the Black community is more supportive of my work. When I write about the work, about finding my own Blackness, it's a more raw and genuine experience. And so I just kind of use that vantage point as much as I could to talk about intricate parts of the Black experience that not a lot of people can focus on and think about.
Right. And is the language barrier kind of a huge deal? Does it push you off to the side a bit, or?
Yeah, I would say it's a huge deal. I mean, it's not like intentionally being pushed off to the side, but there's just something about being able to speak your native tongue that means a lot to folks. And that's important and beautiful. And like I mentioned, I would never want to infiltrate that. And so I never want to, mess with that at all. And so it's not that I'm intentionally kept away from things, but it's that I would never want to make a space feel uncomfortable because I was in it. Or I would never want to make people feel like they were forced, that needed to speak English around me, to talk about my experiences being Mexican and not speaking Spanish, and still focusing on Latino community, focusing on Latino issues, thinking about documentation, thinking about all these same topics that I should talk about but talking about it from my vantage point. I can't do anything about, not being able to speak Spanish. I want to learn and eventually will. But until I do, spaces that only speak Spanish or spaces that only speak Spanish, and I would never force anybody to change that. I think just all I can ever do is tell my story, and I don't try to tell other people's stories. So
Yeah, so I can definitely understand that. I'm Arab myself, and I speak really okay Arabic. It's what they call broken Arabic. So when it's just me among my friends, or with me and my mom, I don't mind speaking Arabic at all. I'm very comfortable with it. But once I'm actually in a room full of Arabs, whether it's my mom's friends or a party or whatever, and they start speaking to me, and I understand everything, but
right.
when I speak, first of all, the dialect is different as well. And so they'll always go like, wait, what'd you say, huh? And you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to offend anyone.
And how could you not know something that's supposed to be what you've been told is so crucial to who you are? I mean, how can you be this? And so my work is about taking that experience and doing something with it. I mean, I feel like the uncomfort that I have, having to, toe between these two worlds, that's something that needs to be present in my poetry because it's so present in my life. And so if I can't make my audience feel what that discomfort must feel like, I'm not doing my job as a poet. If I can't talk about being light-skinned and also to still talk about colorism and racism in the Black community, then I'm not using my platform for good. I mean, so it's just knowing all these things, being smart, knowing why they all happen, and then making the best kind of plan to deal with it as you can. And I think it's, as I was mentioning, just telling the story from your vantage point and only your vantage point.
And you're a teacher now, right?
Yeah.
What do you teach?
And so I teach with youth ambassadors.
Okay.
And so it's a local nonprofit kind of job, soft skills program.
Okay, so as a teacher and as a father now, well, actually, I don't know how long you've been a father, but as a teacher and as a father, how do you teach your students, or how do you teach your son or daughter? They're balancing the different ethnicities as well, the different races. How do you teach them how to cope with it and how to embrace each part of them?
Yeah, I was just very vulnerable in my first chapbook, which is on my shirt, Blackness and Latinidad. And so that was actually all about that experience when I, realized I was going to have kids and I realized they were going to be facing my same issues. Yeah. I felt like they needed a how-to guide on how to deal with all these issues. And so you're never going to be able to walk in and perfectly explain racism, perfectly explain to the person how it's going to impact them and how, they're going to have to individually decide how to deal with it. Because as a person of color, as you walk through a white world, you have to deal with and navigate these things all the time, whether it's a small casual racist joke that's told between someone you thought was your friend, or whether it's constantly seeing people look like you, be killed on TV. You have to find a way to deal with those. And so I took that just very personal experience that I had and I put it on the page and let my son see that, they're not always going to be right, that there's going to be issues and they're going to have to choose between the two, and they're going to have to know that the world is constantly going to make them feel that way and that they can find a safe and healthy view of their racial and ethnic identity.
And what are you working on currently? What's in the works?
Yeah, so I really, when I wrote my first book, Blackness and Latinidad, I wrote it and I thought that, as I was mentioning earlier, it was for my sons, and I was going to talk about, being a young, multiracial person. What I realized towards the end of it, and I started, performing around, the U.S., going to Denver, doing curriculum, and started and doing kind of presentations on Latinidad and Blackness in Nebraska, I started thinking about the fact that my poetry stood for something more than just simply wanting to talk to my sons. And so what I meant by that was my poetry was getting to these big, large, macro level processes like racism, sexism, misogyny, colorism, in these very, very intricate but personal stories. And so I realized the stories meant more than my intentions going into writing the story. The stories are talking about society. The stories are talking about the ways that you have to navigate the world as a person of color. And that was more important than, just talking about the awkwardness of being multiracial. And so I realized that what was important about my work was that I was telling stories that other people hadn't told before. What was important about my work was that I was getting to an experience that so many people found just disjointing and weird, but talking about it in such a way that they were able to relate to it, even if they weren't, for example, mixed in the same way that I was. And so the stories themselves were more important than the poems. It was more important to be performing in front of people and to get these ideas out there than it was to be writing a book by itself. And so my new project that I'm working on, I just want to capture on that power of the narrative. And so it's going to be called The Stories That We Tell Ourselves to Live.
Oh, wow.
And so it's thinking about
Powerful title.
writing the way that we need to write in order to make ourselves be represented. So for me, talking about those experiences of being multiracial, it was so important because other people who are also, especially Black and Latino, said that my work did something for them.
Is it going to be like short stories
Yeah.
or okay?
So it's actually going to be an ethnographic project, and
Okay.
so I'm going to be talking to some educators who maybe don't actually have the term educator, because as I mentioned, I'm a teacher, but I'm not certified. I don't have a certification in Kansas or Missouri to teach. I teach in a nonprofit, but I've done great work there because I've thrown away the general, lesson plan scripts and wrote what was real to these students to teach them about politics.
Right.
And so I've been an educator throughout my life, whether it's through my poetry or whether it's through my mentorship of other folks, but I'm not given that term. Why is that? And I think that's because of the way we understand education, the way that we understand, formalities. And so I want to think about and talk to some other people where survival is key central idea in their work, but they're not maybe called educators, but they have something to teach us in life. Yeah. Along with, the poems that I write to people like me about the stories that I had to tell myself to live, to let writing be the way that I saw myself be represented. Yeah. So
yeah, I would love a copy of that once it's there. It sounds very interesting. I'd love to take a read. I actually definitely want to read Blackness of Tina Dad.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I like the cleverness of the Black. Oh,
yeah.
When I read it the first time, I thought it said blacklessness at first. But it's lackness, and then okay, that's
yeah. So I
like
love.
that.
I can talk a little bit about why I chose this title for my first book. I mean, I was focused on liminality, so I was focused on that in between feeling and being caught between two what people have told me are two different worlds of Blackness and Latinidad. And Latinidad is just kind of the Spanish version of like Latinness.
Oh,
and so
okay.
it's very similar to like Blackness, so it's like Latinidad.
Oh, so it's not Latini. So your dad's not. Oh my god.
Yeah, so I loved it. Yeah, so like I thought I was really clever with this book title.
Yes.
So I was thinking about this experience of in-betweenness, thinking about liminality, thinking about Blackness, and thinking about Latinidad, and I wanted to write about Blackness and Latinidad from my perspective, being in both, not being seen as either sometimes, and what that all meant. When I started to write, and I realized I was writing also to other multiracial youth, I was thinking about the fact that I was becoming a father at that time. And so that's where the parentheses around dad came from. But in terms of Blackness and the parentheses around lack, my experience of Blackness and what I've learned about Blackness has actually been to my experience of having a lack of skin color, a lack of acceptance in the community. And so rather than, kind of like boo-hoo cry about it, I focus on like what that experience was for me. It's really interesting story.
Yeah, I think that's a very creative title, and I think that a lot of people are going to appreciate the fact that you accepted the situations you were in.
I just usually call it like leveraging privilege.
Yeah.
Like I know, and I think it's really important to think about how light-skinned folks in communities of color are treated far differently than their peers who are have a darker skin tone. There's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing that I want to do besides eradicate that idea of colorism. I can't get rid of that idea by pretending that I don't benefit from it. I benefit from colorism. I benefit from being light-skinned and having people say, I want to hear what he has to say about Blackness. I benefit from that. And so I talk about colorism in my work. I don't shy away from it. I talk about the privilege. And so it's all about thinking about narrative. What do we tell ourselves about ourselves, and how can we change that message for the generations to come?
I love that. You are the solution, Vincente. You found it. You are it.
So once again, thank you so much for being here, Vincente. For those of you listening, if you enjoyed the podcast and would like to keep up with Vincente, he has a website. It is IamSubVersive.com, and his book, Blackness and Latinidad, is available on that website. Thank you all for listening. To listen to more creatives and influencers, visit www.SubVersive.com.
VincentePerez.com.